Make sure I can see Kick Chat. You guys ready to start this? Hold on, I gotta turn off the heater. I turned it on to make it kind of warm. Okay, but whether I believe I'm the main character or not, like, the other people still matter, and I kind of just like respect their privacy. Months. We're on page 40. We're not gonna take 6 months. This did take us twice, though. But we're about to read for like half an hour straight. I should have made tea. Let's go recap. I don't like where I'm sitting. Don't like that either. I just don't like my hair today. I don't like anything. Whatever. I hate whenever I look like shit on a day whenever I'm reading, because it's going to be up forever. Look at this. I can't do this. No, but I am far away from my armrest over here. There we go. That's my mark. I'm going to use these little squares down here for my mark. Oh, but then I cover the board. No. Oh, no, I don't. Okay, it's okay. Can't sit on the dress. Recap. Alright, the recap, it was like, they were talking about how Mo had just left. Maggie was sad because they were fighting. They usually don't fight that often, but they were fighting because he wanted her to get rid of the stories and stop talking about the ink world that they're calling it now, the realm of the Inkheart book. And then, yeah, they were fighting by the time he had left. Then she was still thinking about that world, blah, blah, blah. And then Farad walked up to the lawn. Because before Farad was getting chased by Basta, if y'all remember, like, the first reading. We've only read, like, twice. The first reading, he was getting chased by Basta. So he was running away to go find Maggie and her dad. But her dad's on a trip, and he is already there, so that's pretty much where we're at. And Eleanor's like, oh, if he thinks I'm gonna let him in, blah blah blah, got another thing coming. Eleanor, I don't have on Kick Chat, but they're gonna let him in, obviously. They both miss it. They do. Alright, and for those of you who are new, I feel like I say this every single time, like, it's the same thing every time. There's always a little paragraph before each chapter, maybe a line, a quote, just like a little piece that's like an excerpt of another story or a poem or just whatever, and it's like a foreshadowing of what's about to happen in the chapter. So this one is from, I don't even know how to say this. It honestly looks kind of French. I'm going to show it for if Rudy is still watching. The name The War of the Buttons by Louis Pergode. If you say the D, I don't know. He was stubborn as a mule, clever as a monkey, and nimble as a hare. Chapter 5, Farid. Risa took Farid into the kitchen and tended his feet first. They looked terrible, cut and bleeding. While Risa cleaned them and put bandages over the cuts, Farid began telling a story. His tongue heavy with weariness, Maggie did her best not to stare at him too often. He was still rather taller than she was, even though she'd grown a great deal since they last met. On the night when he had gone off with Dustfinger in the book, she hadn't forgotten his face any more than she could forget the day when Mo first read him out of his own story in Tales from the 1001 Nights. She never met another boy with such beautiful eyes, almost like a girl's. They were as black as his hair, which was cut a little shorter than it had been in the old days, and made him look more grown up. Farid. Maggie felt her tongue relishing his name, and quickly turned her eyes away when he raised his head and looked at her. Eleanor stared at him all the time without any embarrassment, and with as much hostility as she had shown in scrutinizing Dustfinger when he had sat in her kitchen table feeding his marten bread and ham. She hadn't let Farid bring the marten into the house with them. "And if he eats a single songbird in my garden, he'd better watch out," she said as the marten scurried away over the pale gravel. She had bolted the door after him, as if Gwyn could open the locks as easily as his master. Farid played with the book of matches as he told his tale. "Look at that," Eleanor whispered to Maggie. "Just like the matchstick eater. Don't you think he looks a lot like him?" Maggie did not reply. She didn't want to miss a word of the story Farid had to tell. She wanted to hear everything about Dustfinger's return, about the man with the hellhound who read aloud so well, about the snarling creature that would have been one of the big cats from the Wayless Wood, and about the words that Basta had shouted after Farid. "You can run, but I'll get you yet, do you hear? You, the fire eater, Silvertongue, and his hoity-toity daughter, and the old man who wrote those accursed words. I'll kill you all, one by one." While Farid told his story, Risa's eyes kept straying to the grubby piece of paper he had put down on the kitchen table. She looked down at it as if she were afraid of it, as if the words on the paper could draw her back again, back to the ink world. When Farid repeated the threat Basta had shouted, she put her arms around Maggie and held her close. But Darius, who had been sitting next to Eleanor in silence all this time, buried his face in his hands. Farid didn't waste much time describing how he had gotten to Eleanor's house on his bare, bloody feet. In answer to Maggie's questions, he just muttered something about getting a lift from a truck driver. He ended his account abruptly, as if he had suddenly run out of words, and when he fell silent, it was very quiet in the big kitchen. Farid had brought an invisible guest with him. Beer. "Put more coffee on, Darius," said Eleanor as she looked gloomily at the table laid for supper. No one was taking any notice of it. This could be iced tea, it's so cold. Darius set to work at once, busy and eager, like a bespectacled squirrel, while Eleanor gave Farid a glance, as cold as if he were personally responsible for the bad news he had brought. Maggie still remembered just how alarming he had once found that look. The woman with pebble eyes, she had secretly called Eleanor. Sometimes the name still fitted. "What a terrific story!" exclaimed Eleanor as Risa went to give Darius a hand. Farid's news had obviously made him so nervous that he couldn't measure out the right amount of ground coffee. He had just begun counting the spoonfuls he was tipping into the filter for the third time when Risa gently took the measuring spoon from his hand. I'm gonna have to get more water. My bottle's not got a lot in it. So Basta's back with a brand new knife and a mouthful of peppermint leaves, I suspect. Bloody hell. Eleanor was apt to swear when she was anxious or annoyed. As if it wasn't bad enough waking up every third night drenched in sweat because I've seen his foxy face in my dreams, not to mention his knife. But let's try to keep calm. Look at it like this. Boston knows where I live, but obviously it's Mo and Maggie he's after, not me. So this house ought really to be safe. As well safe as house is for you. After all, he's not likely to know you've moved in here, is he? She looked at Risa and Maggie triumphantly, as if this were a conclusive argument. But Maggie's response made Eleanor's face darken at once. Farrad knew, she pointed out. So he did, growled Eleanor, her glance turning to Farrad again. You knew, too. How? Her voice was so sharp that Farrad instinctively flinched. An old woman told us, he said in a wavering voice. We went back to Capricorn's village after the fairies Dustfinger took with them turned to ashes. He wanted to see if the same thing had happened to the others. The whole village was deserted, not a soul in sight, not even a stray dog. Only ashes, ashes everywhere. So we went to the next village and tried to find out just what had happened. And, well, that was when we heard how a fat woman had been there, saying something about dead fairies, but at least she said, luckily the human beings hadn't died on her too, and they were living with her now. Eleanor lowered her gaze guiltily and collected a few crumbs from her plate with one finger. Damn it, she muttered. Yes, perhaps I did say rather too much in that shop when I phoned you from there. I was in such a state after seeing an empty village. How could I guess those gossips would tell Dustfinger about me? Dustfinger, of all people, since when do old women talk to someone like him? Or to someone like Basta, thought Maggie. But Farrad just shrugged his shoulders, rose to his feet, which were now covered with bandages, and began limping up and down Eleanor's kitchen. Dustfinger thought you'd all be here in any case, he said. We even passed this way once because he wanted to see if she was all right. He jerked his head Risa's way. Eleanor snorted scornfully. Oh, did he indeed? How good of him. She never liked Dustfinger, and the fact that he had stolen the book from Mo before disappearing had done little to lessen her dislike. Risa, however, smiled at Farrad's words. Though she tried to hide her smile from Eleanor, Maggie still clearly remembered the morning when Darius had brought her mother the strange little bundle he'd found outside the front door. A candle, a few pencils, and a box of matches, all tied up with the stems of blue speedwell. Maggie had known at once who the bundle came from, and so did Risa. Well, said Eleanor, drumming on her plate with the handle of her knife, I'm delighted to hear that the matchstick eater is back where he belongs. The very idea of him slinking around my house by night. It's just a pity he didn't take Basta too. Basta. When Eleanor said his name, Risa suddenly rose from her chair, went out to the corridor, and came back with the telephone. She held it out to Maggie with the look of entreaty in her eyes and began gesticulating so excitedly with her other hand that even Maggie had difficulty in reading the signs she traced in the air. But finally she understood. Risa wanted her to call Mo, of course. It seemed forever before he came to the phone. He'd probably been working. When Mo was away, he always worked late into the night, so that he could get home sooner. Maggie, he sounded surprised. Perhaps he thought she was calling because of their quarrel, but who'd be interested in that stupid argument now? It was some time before he could make anything of the words she was hastily stammering out. Slowly, Maggie, he kept saying. Take it slowly. But that was easier said than done when your heart was in your mouth, and Basta might be waiting at Eleanor's garden this very minute. Maggie didn't even dare to think this through to its logical conclusion. Mo, on the other hand, remained strangely calm, almost as if he had expected the past to catch up with them again. Stories never really end, Maggie, he had once told her. Even if the books like to pretend they do. Stories go on, they don't end on the last page, any more than they began on the first page. Has Eleanor switched on the burglar alarm? He asked now. Yes. Has she told the police? No. She says they wouldn't believe her anyway. She ought to call them all the same and give them a description of Basta. Y'all, these freaking bands are making my jaw so tired. It's like a workout. I'm gonna have like a freaking muscly jaw by the end of the 6 months. I mean, not really, but why am I shaking my water? Well, that's like a lot of resistance in there right now. even was I? She ought to call them all the same and give them a description of Basta. You can describe him between you, right? What a question. Maggie had tried to forget Basta's face, but it would live on in her memory for the rest of her life, as clear as a photograph. Listen, Maggie, perhaps Mo wasn't quite as calm as he pretended. His voice didn't sound the same as usual. I'll drive back tonight. Tell Eleanor and your mother. I'll be with you by tomorrow morning at the latest. Bolt everything and keep the windows closed. Understand? Maggie nodded, forgetting that Mo couldn't see her over the phone. Maggie? Yes, I understand. She tried to sound calm and brave, even if she didn't feel that way. She was scared, badly scared. See you tomorrow, Maggie. She could tell from his voice that he was going to set out right away, and suddenly, seeing the moonlit road in her mind's eye, the long road back, a new and terrible thought came into her mind. What about you? She exclaimed. Mo, suppose Basta's lying in wait for you somewhere. But her father had already hung up. Eleanor decided to put Farid where Dustfinger had once slept, in the attic room, where crates of books were stacked high around the narrow bedstead. Anyone who slept there would surely dream of being struck dead by printed paper. Maggie was told to show Farid the way, and when she wished him good night, he just nodded abstractedly. He looked very lost sitting on the narrow bed, almost as lost as on the day when Mo had read to him in Capricorn's church, a thin, nameless boy with a turban over his black hair. That night, before she went to sleep, Eleanor checked the burglar alarm several times to make sure it really was switched on. As for Darius, he went to find the rifle that Eleanor sometimes fired into the air as if she saw a cat prowling under one of the birds' nests in her garden. Wearing the orange bathrobe that Eleanor had given him last Christmas, it was much too big for him. He settled down in the armchair in the entrance hall, the rifle on his lap, staring at the front door with a determined expression. But when Eleanor came to check the alarm for the second time, he was already fast asleep. It was a long time before Maggie could sleep. She looked at the shelves where her notebooks used to stand, stroked the empty wood, and finally kneeled down by the red-painted box that Mo had made long ago for her favorite books. She hadn't opened it for months. There wasn't room in it for a single extra book, and by now it was too heavy for her to take it when she went away, so Eleanor had given her the bookcase to hold more of the books she loved. It stood beside Maggie's bed, and it had glass doors and carvings on it that twined over the dark wood, making it look as if it hadn't forgotten that it was once alive. And the shelves behind the glass doors were well filled, for by now Risa and Eleanor, as well as Mo, gave Maggie books, and even Darius brought her a new one now and then. But her old friends, the books Maggie had already owned before they had moved in with Eleanor, still lived in the box, and when she opened the heavy lid, it was almost as if half-forgotten voices met her ears, and familiar faces were looking at her. How well-worn they all were. Isn't it odd how much fatter a book gets when you've read it several times? Mo had said when, on Maggie's last birthday, they were all looking at her dear old books again, as if some things were left between the pages every time you read it. Feelings, thoughts, sounds, smells. When you look at the book again, many years later, you find yourself there too. I have hiccups. Just gonna hold my spot. Reading some what? This is called, this is Inkspell. This is book number 2 in the Inkheart trilogy. It's rated like 12 plus. Chill. I think. Pretty sure this is what I read online. It's rated 18 plus though on my page, because we do activities and words that are 18 plus in the mix. There's so many sticks floating down the river. Can I buy some of their weed? No, I'm not licensed to sell. Where were we? I put my thingies here to keep a spot my fingers. Why is everything thingies? Because y'all should get it. You can't just smoke hair. Ew. Ugh. I'm on this side. Isn't it odd how much fatter a book gets when you've read it several times, Mo had said when on Maggie's last birthday they were looking at all her dear old books again. As if something were left between the pages every time you read it. Feelings, thoughts, sounds, smells, and then when you look at the book again many years later, you find yourself there too. A slightly younger self, slightly different, as if the book had preserved you like a flower, both strange and familiar. That's so weird, honestly, just reading that one paragraph. Consider, like, even how it just said, like, a pressed flower, considering the last book we read, Inkart, I literally almost cried during one of the readings because I did like this and I smelled it and it smelled so fucking good and I just got so emotional and I just like almost cried. But then in this book, after we started this one and I first opened it, there was a pressed flower in here. That's so weird. It's just kind of interesting. Y'all could probably hear my elbow squeaking, huh? It's probably annoying. That's just weird and interesting. Slightly younger, yes. Maggie picked up one of the books lying on top and leafed through it. She had read it at least a dozen times. Ah, here was the scene she liked best when she was 8. And there was the one she had marked with a red pencil when she was 10 because she thought it was so beautiful. She ran her finger down the wobbly line. There'd been no Risa in her life then, no Eleanor, no Darius, only Mo. No longing to see blue fairies, no memories of a scarred face, a marten with little horns, and a boy who always went barefoot. No memory of Basta and his knife. A different Maggie had read that book, very different, and there she would stay between its pages, preserved as a memento. With a sigh, Maggie closed the book again and put it down next door. Did she, like Maggie, keep thinking of the threat that Basta had shouted after Farid? I ought to go to her, thought Maggie. Perhaps our fear won't be so bad if we're together. But just as she was getting up, Reese's footsteps died away, and it was quiet in the room next door. Quiet as sleep. Maybe sleep wasn't a bad idea. Mo certainly wouldn't arrive any sooner, just because she was awake and waiting for him. Oh, if only she could have called him. But he was always forgetting to switch his cell phone on. Maggie closed the lid of her book softly. The lid of her book box softly, as if the sound might wake Risa again, and blew out the candles that she lit every evening, although Eleanor was always telling her not to. As she was taking her t-shirt off her head, she heard a knock at the door, a very quiet knock. She opened the door, expecting to see her mother outside because she couldn't sleep after all, but it was Farid. He went scarlet in the face when she saw that she was only wearing her underclothes. He stammered an apology, and before Maggie could say anything, limped away again on his lavishly bandaged feet. She almost forgot to put the t-shirt back on before going after him. What's the matter? She whispered anxiously as she beckoned him back into her room. Did you hear anything downstairs? But Farid shook his head. He was holding the piece of paper in his hand. Dustfinger's return ticket. As Eleanor had tartly described it. Hesitantly, he followed Maggie into her room and looked around it as if like someone who doesn't feel comfortable in enclosed spaces. Ever since he had disappeared with Dustfinger, leaving no trace behind, he had probably spent most of his days and nights in the open air. I'm sorry, Farid stammered, staring at his toes. 2 of Reese's bandages were already peeling off. I know it's late, but... And for the first time, he looked Maggie in the eye, turning red again as he did so. But Orpheus says he didn't read it all. He went on, his voice hesitating. He just left out the words that would have taken me into the book, too. He did it on purpose, but I have to warn Dustfinger, so... So what? Maggie pushed the chair from her desk over to him. Dang, you guys went away. No. Come back. extra page. So what? Maggie pushed the chair from her desk over to him and sat down on the windowsill herself. Farrad sat down as hesitantly as he had entered her room. You must get me there too, please. He held a dirty piece of paper out to her again with such a pleading expression in his black eyes that Maggie didn't know where to look. How long and thick his eyelashes were. Hers were nowhere near as beautiful. Please, I know you can do it, he stammered. I remember that night in Capricorn's village. I remember all about it, and you had only a single sheet of paper then. That night in Capricorn's village. Maggie's heart always began to thud when she thought of it. The night when she had to read the shadow into appearing, and then hadn't been able to make him kill Capricorn until Mo did it for her. Orpheus wrote the words. He said so himself. He just didn't read them aloud, but they're here on this paper. Of course, my actual name isn't there, or it wouldn't work. Farrad was speaking faster and faster. Orpheus says that's a secret of it. If you want to change the story, you must only use words that are already in the book, if possible. He said that. Maggie's heart missed a beat, as if it had stumbled over Farrad's information. You must only use words that are already in the book, if possible. Was that why she'd never been able to read anything out of Reese's stories? Because she used words that weren't in ink art? Or was it just because she didn't know enough about writing? Yes, Orpheus thinks he's so clever because of the way he can read aloud. Farrad spat out the man's name like a plum pit. But if you ask me, he's not half as good as it as you or your father. Maybe not, thought Maggie, but he read Dustfinger back, and he wrote the words for it himself. Neither Mo nor I could have done that. She took from Farrad the piece of paper with the passage that Orpheus had written. The handwriting was difficult to decipher, but it was beautiful, very individual and curiously ornate. When exactly did Dustfinger disappear? Farrad shrugged. I don't know, he muttered, abashed. Of course, she had forgotten that he couldn't read. Maggie traced the first sentence with her finger. Dustfinger returned on a day fragrant with the scent of berries and mushrooms. Thoughtfully, she lowered the piece of paper. It's no good, she said. We don't even have the book. How can it work without the book? But Orpheus didn't use it either. Dustfinger took it away from him before he read the words on that paper. Farrad pushed his chair back and came to stand beside her. Feeling him so close made Maggie uneasy. She didn't try to figure out why. But that can't be so, she murmured. Dustfinger had gone, though. A few handwritten sentences had opened the door between the words on the page for him, the door that Mo had tried to batter down so unsuccessfully, and it was not Finoglio, the author of the book, who had written those sentences, but a stranger with a curious name, Orpheus. Maggie knew more than most people about what waited beyond the words. She herself had already opened doors, had lured living, breathing creatures out of faded, yellowing pages, and she had been there when her father read this boy out of an Arabian fairy tale. The boy of flesh and blood now standing beside her. However, this Orpheus seemed to know far, far more than she did. Even more than Mo, Farrad still called him Silvertongue, and suddenly Maggie was afraid of the words on that grubby piece of paper. She put it down on her desk as if it burned her fingers. What? Why are you asking the same stuff so many times in a row? Why else just repeating yourselves? Morpheus. And here it's Orpheus with that O. She could feel me looking at her. Please at least try. Farrad's voice sounded almost pleading. Suppose Orpheus has already read Basta back after all. Dustfinger has to learn that they're in league with each other. He thinks he's safe from Basta in his own world. Maggie was still staring at the words written by Orpheus. They sounded beautiful, enchantingly beautiful. Maggie felt her tongue longing to taste them. She very nearly began reading them aloud. Horrified, she clapped her hand to her mouth. Orpheus. Of course she knew the name, and the story that surrounded the tangle of flowers and thorns. Eleanor had given her a book with a beautiful poem about him in it. Orpheus with his lute made trees, and the mountain tops that freeze bow themselves when he did sing. To his music plants and flowers, ever sprung as sun and showers, there had made a lasting spring. Everything that heard him play, even the billows of the sea, hung their heads and then lay by in sweet music as such art, killing care and grief of heart, falling asleep or hearing die. She looked at Farid with the question in her eyes. How old is he? Orpheus? Farid shrugged. 20, 25, how should I know? Difficult to say. His face is like a child's. So young, but the words on the paper didn't sound like a young man's words. They sounded as if they knew a great many things. We're almost done. I'm hurting. You chiropractor. Please, Farid was still looking at her. You will try, won't you? Mary. Maggie looked out of the window. She couldn't help thinking of the empty fairy's nest, the glass men who had vanished, and something Farid had said to her long ago. Sometimes when you went to the well to wash early in the morning, those tiny fairies would be whirring above the water. Hardly bigger than the dragonflies you have here, and blue as violets. They weren't very friendly, but by night they shone like glowworms. All right, she said, and it was almost as if someone else were answering Farid. All right, I'll try, but your feet must get better first. The world my mother talks about isn't a place where you'd want to be lame. Nonsense, my feet are fine. Farid walked up and down on the soft carpet as if to prove it. You can try right away as far as I'm concerned. But Maggie shook her head. No, she said firmly, I must learn to read it fluently first. That's not going to be easy given his handwriting, and it's smeared in several places, so I'll probably copy it out. This man Orpheus wasn't lying. He did write something about you, but I'm not quite sure that it will do. And if I try it, she went on, trying to sound very casual, if I try it, then I want to come with you. What? Yes, why not? Maggie couldn't keep her voice from showing how hurt she felt by his horrified look. Farid did not reply. Didn't he understand that she wanted to see it for herself? She wanted to see everything that Dustfinger and her mother had told her about. Dustfinger in a voice, soft with longing. The fairies swarming above the grass, trees so high that you thought they would catch the clouds in their branches. The wayless wood, the strolling players, the laughing prince's castle, the silver towers of the castle of night, the Umbra market, the fire that danced for him, the whispering pool with the water nymphs' faces looked up at you. No, Farid didn't understand. He had probably never felt that yearning for a completely different world, any more than he felt the homesickness that had broken Dustfinger's heart. Farid wanted just one thing. He wanted to find Dustfinger, warn him of Basta's knife, and be back with him again. He was Dustfinger's shadow. That was the part he wanted to play, never mind what story they were in. Forget it, you can't come too. Without looking at Maggie, he limped back to the chair she had given him, sat down and pulled off the bandages that Risa had so carefully put on his toes. People can't read themselves into a book. Even Orpheus can't. He told Dustfinger so himself. He tried it several times, he said. It just won't work. Oh no, Maggie tried to sound more sure of herself than she had felt. You said yourself that I read better than he does, so perhaps I can make it work. Even if I can't write as well as she does, she added to herself. Oh man. Title of the book is Inkspell. Book number 2 in the Inkheart trilogy. We're almost finished with this chapter, guys. Hi, Asmable. Hi, everybody. Chungus. Space Cadet. I'm like out of breath. This has been a long read, guys. Farid cast her an uneasy glance as he put the bandages in his trouser pocket. But it's dangerous there, he said, particularly for a good... He didn't finish the word. Instead, he began inspecting his blood-stained toes intently. Idiot. Maggie's anger tasted bitter on her tongue. Who did he think she was? She probably knew more about the world she'd been reading him into than he did. I know it's dangerous, she said, piqued. Either I go with you or I don't read aloud from this sheet of paper. You must make up your mind, and now you'd better leave me alone. I have to think. Farid cast a final glance at the piece of paper with Orpheus's words on it before he went to the door. "When will you try?" he asked before he went back to the corridor. "Tomorrow?" "Perhaps," was all Maggie would say. Then she closed the door behind him and was alone with the words that Orpheus had written.